talking about other things. So I'm starting the live stream now. Okay, it has started, and I'm sharing the link now with you guys, so you can. Okay, so the link is. So that's the link. So okay, for instance, and I need to bring up Visual Studio Code so I can explain that to you correctly. So when you say a value, when we talk about data types, we are not necessarily talking about, data and value can actually be used interchangeably because they mean the exact same thing, right? So for instance, in JavaScript, are you guys with me? Sorry guys, I've been talking and I don't know, my mic was muted. So I said, do you know that in JavaScript we actually use the concept of value and data interchangeably, right? We can say value in a place, then we say data in another place, and we mean the exact same thing, right? So
Yes, sir.
string, numbers, boolean, empty values like null and undefined are all data types, right? So boolean is the data type, but true or false are values. So those values are grouped under a data type known as boolean. Does that make sense? So when I ask for data type, I'm not asking for just the data. I'm asking for what type of, which type, which convention or which term is a data type. True or false are not data types. They are basically data. You understand what I'm talking about? So in the concept of grouping
Yes, sir.
and categorizing things together, you can't refer. Just like if I write, okay, if I write something like, your name, Laura, I can't call this a data type, but it is a data. It is value, right? But this is what? A string data type. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So when I say true or I say false, I can't necessarily call them, I can't say false is a data type. No, false is just a bare data. But we can now characterize it under a data type, which is boolean. You get the point? So when we ask for data types, we are talking
Yes, sir.
about you know strings, numbers, what string number, undefined, null, and then what's the other one? Boolean, right? Yeah. So
Yes.
yeah, so that's what we are talking about. So for in terms of types, we deal with those four major types, and then and we are going to be looking at something else, going forward today, because that's one of the things we'll be learning today, basically, because what we've learned so far are just primitive data types. So we in JavaScript we have primitive data types and we have non-primitive data types, and I will talk about that in a bit. But at the moment, let me also open a browser window and bring it right here too, so we can just have something going on. Okay, I think we'll need a timekeeper in this class. And please guys, keep tabs on YouTube so we don't lose the stream, because it seems like we are very good at losing the stream. So we're doing a lot of arithmetic, and we talked about primitive data types, which are these data types are, let me just put it on top of it. So these are basically primitive data types, you know and then we talked about four of them, or if you will maybe kind of just ignore this grouping that I group these empty values, because null and undefined are basically the same thing, but there are very weird differences between them that I don't want to actually start talking about now. So we have these four primitive data types, yeah. And we talked about arithmetic operators. Then we dealt with binary operators, right? Binary operators actually operate on two values and produce one new value. So we dealt with plus, minus, multiplication, division, then the modulo, which deals with remainder. Then we also talked about a unary operator, which only operates on one value, and we saw type of, which just kind of finds what data type a particular data is of. Then we saw comparison operators, which is greater than, less than, greater than, equal to, or less than equal to. equality and not equal to. And it's very important, some of you must have missed that in the test. When you do this, this is not actually equality, this is an assignment operator. Yeah, this is an assignment operator. And then we have one other operator which is strict equality, and let me disable this suggestion so it doesn't mess up this. So this is strict equality, and what that means is, we are going to talk about it in a bit. So basically at the moment we've seen operations like addition, subtraction, and basically those, we've seen many of these operations. And if you are not quite sure what we are talking about, you probably should look at the video from the previous class. And if you didn't do very well, if you didn't do very well with the test as well, just look at the video from the last class, because pretty much everything you need to answer those questions are in that video. So if you still missed a couple of questions, that means you have to kind of just revisit the video and kind of understand the terminologies that were discussed in it. So today we are going to be dealing with another kind of, and I don't know if this thing is actually neat enough because it looks very rough to me. Let me just do this. I think this makes sense, just to separate them. Yeah, so let me do this again here. Let me just kind of, and I won't be doing this anymore. I'm just going to be copying and pasting it. Okay, Ternary Operator. So here let's press space just to make everything look neat and nice. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So what we are going to be starting with today is logical, and it is almost not logical to actually have logical operators, because everything we are really dealing with is logic. For us to have logical operators, because so everybody turn on your videos. Thank you. Okay, so logical operators are basically, they basically they return something based on specific conditionals. So you will see cases where you actually have an expression on one side of a logical operator and another expression on the other side, and then the logical operator just operates between the two of them and returns a value by default. So the first one we are going to be dealing with is the, what's it called? And I will just call it, for the sake of where we are in the class, I call it OR operator. And then the second one is the ampersand operator, which basically is AND. Yeah, so basically when you use this between two expressions, you are saying it's either this or that. And they also call this kind of operators short circuit, and you will realize why it is called short circuiting now. So basically I will just come here and then let me just do logical operators. So basically I'll do a console.log, because this is basically how we are outputting everything for now. So I will say 2 equals 3, and then I will now say or 3 is greater than 5. Does that make sense to you guys? Hello? So basically what we have here should evaluate. Hello?
I hear some.
Okay, so what we have here should basically evaluate to a boolean. So let's open the console, and I'm going to just kind of so let me clean this up. So I think let me just comment, or should we just remove all of these other examples we've used so far? Or let me just comment them out. Do you guys even need this stuff?
We need it too. Yes.
Okay, so you can see that this evaluates to what? False. And you see what happens. Okay, let me just do something true here, which is what? 10 is greater than 3, right? So you can see what is going on here. And what's going on here is very simple. We are saying 2 is equal to 3. And that value will evaluate to a boolean, right? Because it is a comparison operator, right? And a comparison operator will always evaluate to a boolean, right? So 2 is not equal to 3. So basically what we have here is going to be false, right? 2 equals 3 is going to be false. We now say or 10 is greater than what? 5. And 10 is greater than 5 is what? True. So you see what is happening? It will ignore what is false and return what is true. So that is it. We are saying it's either this or this. So in this case, if I say 3 equals 3 and I say 1 is greater than 5, you will see what's happening. It still returns true, right? So the OR operator will just evaluate, the first expression and see if it is true. Then if the first one is true, it will ignore the second one. Does that make sense? Then if the first one is false, it will proceed to evaluate the second one and see if it is true. Then if that one is true, it is going to return it as true. But if there's a case where both of them are not true, it's going to then return false. Do you see that? Hello?
Yes, sir.
So this is
So sorry, sir. I want to ask a question. So is it safe to say that true itself has a higher precedence than false?
No. They call this kind of operators, and I'm going to come to that. Remember I said they are short-circuiting operators. And short-circuiting operators means the idea behind it is to just evaluate only the true part of only one part of the conditional. It evaluates only one side of it. So if the one side is true, it forgets about the other side. If if both of them are false, then it returns false. So what it does is this is not a matter of precedence. Basically, this just, we are saying, because one of the cases where you get to use this is, let me just show you this. I can say something like if 4 is less than 2, I want console.log. Nice one for those of you on social media. And you can see that what we have in this console here never makes it to our console because this evaluation is false, right? So 4 is less than 2 is false. So for that reason, it doesn't render this. If I put something else here and I say my if block was ignored, and you can see that my if block was ignored actually gets to the console, but this doesn't get to the console because this is false. It doesn't execute this if block. Does that make sense? So what you normally do with short circuit operators is you want to check for something, and what you want to check for is either this or that. So in the case of the OR operator, right? So what you want to check is if any of these expressions are true, I want you to log this out in the console. So in this case now, both of them are false. But if I were to make one of them true like this, just one of them is true, you see that we get that stuff logged into the console. Does that make sense? So it's not really a matter of precedence. We just use this kind of expression, these logical operators, to be able to tell our program to do something based on a condition or not. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so it's not a matter of precedence because both of these can be true and yet one of them will still get evaluated. So I can say 3 plus 3, 1 equals 5, let me say 5 equals 5, and I also come here and say 5 equals 5. And you can see we will have what? We have true, right? And that true is this first one that's going to return that true, and it will ignore the second one. It doesn't think about this. So now you know that is if I change this to 4, it doesn't even think about that other side of the OR operator. Does that make sense? Hello?
Sure.
Does it? Hello? So forget about all of this.
Yes.
I'm just trying to use that to drive home a point. So we now have the other one, which is like a twin brother. It's also a short circuiting operator. And that is if I say 5, and I want you to guess this for me before I let me disable auto save. so that you can guess it before it makes it to the console. So if I say 5 equals if I say 5 equals 4 and 5 equals 5, what do you think it is going to evaluate to?
True.
It is going to evaluate
True.
to true. Okay, see how this operator works, and let me just save it to let you know it evaluates to false. So see how this operator works. This one will only return the it's always meant to return what is at the right hand side. Do you get the point? If both conditions are true, does that make sense? So if I say 5 equals 5 and 5 equals 5, it is going to return true. But if I say 5 equals 4 and 5 equals 5, it is going to return false, because and means it is this and this that will make this expression make this condition actually pass. So it will watch for both sides of the operator. So both of them have to be true for it to be true. If one is true and one is false, it is going to be false. Does that make sense? Hello? So you can see now we have true. Okay, let me see. So we have true, right? Because both are equal. And if I should come here and say, this equals 4, you can see this is false. The second one is false. And let me just comment this one out so that you can see that this is the one I'm talking about. So you can see it is false now. So both conditions must be true for the AND operator. Does that make sense? But for the OR operator, just one has to be true. And if one is true, it's going to pass. Does it make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir. Reminds me of AND and OR gates. So it reminds me of AND and OR gates.
Yeah. So that's just basically what you are dealing with here. So we have OR and then we have AND. So they call this the AND operator, and this is the OR operator. So remember, this short circuits because if this part of the expression is true, it doesn't run this one. So it is just running only one side of it. Then if this is false, then it goes on to run the other side. Does that make sense? And ignores this one. It never returns the two of them. Does it make sense? And here, if this is false, it forgets about everything. It just returns this. While if this is true, it goes on to evaluate this. And if this is false, it returns false. Does that make sense? So you can see something similar here. For here, if this one is true, it forgets about this. Right? Hello? But if this one is false, it goes on to evaluate this to check if it is true. But here, if this one is true, it never, if this one is true, it proceeds to run this. And it will return this if this is also true. And if this is false, it returns this. Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Does that make sense? So you can
Yes,
do
sir.
a whole lot of expressions like greater than, equal to. All these comparison operators can actually work here. And you can even go, you can do other dynamic things like maybe console.log 3 plus 2 is greater than 3 times 6. You can do a lot of other dynamic things. So 3 plus 2 is what? 5. Is it greater
5.
than 18? No. So that's why you have 4. So you can put a whole lot of expressions. What did I do? Okay, I was going to. So I can now say, or 5 plus 5 is greater than 2 times 3. And guess what it's going to return? Everybody gets that. What is it going to return?
True.
Why?
This is the OR operator, and for the OR operator, one of it must be true. As long as it's true.
Okay. So which one is true?
5 plus 5 is 10.
Okay. So it's going to evaluate to
Greater than,
yeah.
is
So
greater than 5.
yeah, so it evaluates to true. So you are getting it. So let's do another one for the AND operator. So we'll do 3 times 2 is less than 5 times 5, and 4 plus 4 is equal to 8. So what do you think this will evaluate to? Let me just comment this out.
It's true.
True.
True. Are you sure?
It's true.
Yes, both
True.
Yes, both are true.
of them are true.
Okay, that's correct, because 3 times 2 is 6 and it's greater than 3 times 2 is 6. What's that? 3 times 2 is 6 and it is what? Less than 5 times 5, which is 25, right? Then 4 plus 4 equals 8, definitely, right? So you can see how that, how that actually plays off. So what if I were to do something like this and I make this 8 a string? What do you think is going to be the case? And you ask your question, sorry, you answer your question and tell me why you think so. Hello.
I'm trying to think.
Okay, but you sorry, you understand the idea of type cohesion, right? Type
Yes, I
cohesion
don't
means
really do.
JavaScript sometimes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, when you pass in some kind of operations or expressions, it's in the background tries to convert the type to see if it can make sense out of your expression. Then if it fails at that, it returns, you know, undefined or not a number or false, depending on the kind of expression you have. So in this case now, we have this equality symbol, which is this double equality, and that's what's going to bring me to this other expression. Sorry, this other, what's it called? This other operator, comprising operator that we talk called strict equality, and then the strict equality is what is going to, because definitely I know your mind is telling you that this is going to be false, and meanwhile it is still going to be true. And you know why that is? 4 plus 4, the number, equals 4 plus 4, the string. That's because implicit type cohesion, let me write that out, makes JavaScript convert this other string to a number so that it can make sense out of this equality, expression. Does that make sense? So if I want to negate JavaScript from doing that, I use a strict equality, and strict equality does not permit JavaScript to what, do its implicit type cohesion on your expression. So that means you really want to compare to the string 8 and see if it is true or false. Does that make sense? So here it's going to return false because it won't convert the type in this case. Does that make sense to you guys? So this is strict equality, while this other one is not, is non-strict equality, which means when you use this, you'll be surprised that when you do something like console.log 2 equals 2, it is actually going to be true, because JavaScript will convert this 2 string into a number and equalize both of them. That is type cohesion in action. So if you don't want that to happen, you put a third equality sign, and that's going to make it false, because this forbids JavaScript from converting your values, because you are intentionally trying to compare these values together. Do you understand what I'm talking about? And then in
Yes, sir.
JavaScript, you always want to use strict equality, except if you need to use non-strict equality. Maybe if the data you're expecting or you're working with actually permits you to convert things like that. But most of the time you always want to use strict equality signs to be able to. And if I didn't talk about this, I'm sure that most of you will run into some problems when I give you an assignment in this regard to create something and log out the value and so on. I know you're going to run into problems and you won't be able to explain why that is happening. So the next kind of test you're going to be doing is just to be able to you are going to be getting some word, as you're going to be working with. I'm going to give you some word expressions in JavaScript, and I would want you to explain to me, why those things, those outputs, as against what you would not logically think in your own mind as a person, why JavaScript behaves in an exact opposite way compared to that. That's what it's going to be. So does that make sense? So this is not in this category, but does everything make sense so far to you? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Most of it.
Don't worry, when you watch the video, you're going to understand. So we have the comparison operator, logical operator. So I think this is the nice time for me to be able to talk about the ternary operator, but we won't be using it a lot. This is the best time for me to actually start talking about, the, what's it called? The ternary operator and how it works. In as much as that might be the most confusing operator you will have to deal with today, but let's just do it. So did I talk about, okay, I haven't actually mentioned the unary. Okay, this is the unary. So right under the unary, let me do the ternary operator. So that's ternary. And what did I say the ternary operator does? Hello? Hello?
We are here, sir.
I said the unary operator takes in how many values? It operates on how many values? Hello?
I didn't take note of it, sir, because
I
you
said
said you're
one
not being
value.
sticky.
It operates on one value, while the binary operator operates on two values, right? To make a new value out of the two value, one single new value. The unary operator, just like uni now, and then binary by two. Then ternary operator operates on three values. So what you want to do here is you want to do something like 5 equals 5. Then you are asking a question. Then if that is true, you want to return that's true. Sorry. That's true. Then else you want to return that's not true. Does that make sense? So let me just go on to disable this other console.log, and then let's save this. So you can see it says that's true. 5 equals 5. That is true. Else that's not true. So if I were to change this expression to be a falsy expression, then you see that's not true. Do you understand? So if this expression is true, it returns this value on in the middle. But if this expression is false, it returns the one on the right hand side. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So can you see it operates on three value now? So it's a ternary operator. That's why it is called ternary operator. Hello? Is it flowing?
Okay,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Or is not entering?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So just for us to be able to advance, so I'm just trying to cover as many things as possible as far as what we are doing. So I just want to talk about truthy and falsy values in JavaScript. So we have truthy and falsy. So truthy and falsy values are values that by default will evaluate to false when it is encountered in a Boolean context. So a false value will evaluate to false when it is encountered in a Boolean context. So JavaScript uses type cohesion to be able to perform these kind of operations. So for instance, if I do something like console.log 0 equals you see that is true. 0 equals empty string is true. That is because in JavaScript, empty string is false in nature and 0 is also false. Remember, when a Boolean value evaluates to false, that almost equal to 0, right? When we don't use strict equality, just more like when we say, remember when we did that during the last class, when we say false equals 0, and that is true. What is that? Oh, not false, I misspelled that. False. Yeah, so you can see it is true. So the other value that, so these are basically, so let me just list them out. So the falsy values in JavaScript. So and this is one of those things that you would refer to as, sorry. So the first one is an empty string. An empty string is false. Then the next one is false is false. Yeah, of course. Does that make sense that false is false? 3. None.
False is false or false is zero?
False is false. So none,
Okay, sir.
not a number, is false. Then 4, undefined. Undefined is false. 5, null. Remember null. Let's be consistent. Null is false. Then there are some other data types. So and then again, the number 0. So let me number 0. So let me say 6. So 0. So because of this, then the other one is just something I don't want us to talk about now. So that's more like, it's called beach int, but we won't talk about that now. So all of these things, you can use them with logical operators. So basically, and we can't talk about all of those now. So but basically, if I do something like an empty string equals none. Sorry, what's that? Hold on. Type. Sorry. False rather equals an empty string. So type of none. The type of none is number. So but in the case of when you are actually trying to work on an object, and then you are trying to add up a couple
So I cannot hear you, sounding muffled.
Is that the same for everybody?
No, sir.
Everybody
No,
can
sir.
hear me? Huh?
No.
Hello?
I think you should check the network, Laura.
Okay, it's better. Thank you.
Okay, so these are falsy values, and then the reason why they are falsy values is because they will provide false values in a Boolean context. So if we do something like, and this is not a perfect example to actually deal with this. So if I say if so if I say if an empty string so you can see that my if block does not run, right? And that's because this if actually evaluates to a falsy value. So if works in a Boolean context, and we are not supposed to be talking about this if statement, because we'll be looking at it much more later. But for now, let's just take a look at them in a So if I say if false, of course, false. So if false, print this out. It still doesn't print it, right? If I say if none, print this out, and it still doesn't print it out. And if I say if undefined, print this out, it still doesn't print it out, right? Because all these values are false. If I say if 0, print it out, it still doesn't print it out because all of these values are false. So there's another operator that I want us to look at, and I will give you all of these things. And that operator, I'm not quite sure where I'm going to put it in, but it is called the bang operator, and I'll put it under the comparison operators. And the, yeah, where's that? So comparison operator. So it is this operator right here. So if you want to actually convert or coerce a value that is false into true, so what you need to do is just add this, and it's also a unary operator basically. So if I press this, you see it actually says not true, because now, sorry, let's just make what is in it to be true, because it doesn't make sense if something is false and we say not true when it is true. So you can see it actually works now. And then if I say not false, so that's actually a not operator. So if I say not false and I save it, this evaluates to true because not false is true. And let me just kind of get rid of all of these stuffs, and then kind of do a console.log of not false for you, so you can see what we are doing here. So you can see not false evaluates to true. If I say not true will evaluate to false. Does that make sense? So this bang operator is actually used to invert whatever the output of an evaluation is, or an expression. So if it's supposed to be true, if you put the not operator or bang operator, it is actually going to invert it. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's that. So I think let's just do away. Most of all the things I will have to show you, we'll learn those things in passing, maybe while we try to solve other problems, because we can actually exhaust most of all these things. But we've done the best we can with them actually. So let's leave it as it is now. So we've so far seen various primitive types in JavaScript, and it's important that at this point you understand, like I said before, and I want you to also remind you at this point in time that when we say primitive types, that means we also have non-primitive types. So there's something such as there's something such as primitive and non-primitive types in JavaScript. So there's something such as okay. What is that? Okay, let me do this other one. So we have primitive and non-primitive types. And if you remember the primitive man, can anybody remember the primitive man? So we have primitive and non-primitive types. So basically, primitive types in JavaScript, they are data types that can store only a singular value. So basically, if we have 4 is always 4, and what is wrong with this thing? 4 is always 4, and then any attempt to actually alter the number 4 will actually be creating a new value and be destroying the old one. Does that make sense? So if I say console.log 4, that 4 can only be 4. The moment I take it out and I put another number, that is a different value entirely. That's what a primitive type is. It can only store a singular value at a time, and then it is not mutable. It is immutable in the sense that you cannot alter it. 5 will always be 5. The moment you say 5 plus 5, you've created a new value. So those are primitive types. And there are non-primitive types like arrays, objects, and so on. And you see the reason why I said those are non-primitives, and those are way advanced, because I don't want to talk about non-primitive types at this point in time. So a primitive type, like I said, like I told you, if you have your pen and you're writing, it's a very good place for you to actually take it down. So primitive types are values, data types that can only store, a singular value, which can neither be reassigned nor are mutable. So, like I said, the value of 2 is always 2, the value of 3 is always 3. So any modifications is creating, any modification at all, no matter how small it is, will create a whole new value and destroy that old one. So it's very important. So now we are about to enter into a different subject of JavaScript, because while we are dealing with primitive types, we have to be able to allow our program actually keep this primitive type and be able to reference them later. Because now when I type in 5, there's no way for me to reference this 5 anywhere else in this program. Does that make sense? Like this 5 is just here, and this 5 could mean a lot of things. It might be my age, it might be my son's age, it might be my wife's age, it could be anything. So how do you actually store a reference to a particular number within a context so that you can, reference that particular value later in the program? I don't know if that makes sense to you. So that brings us to the subject of variables in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, variables, and some other people would call it bindings. Yeah, casting and binding. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been casted or bounded? Okay, so yeah, so we have is everybody still with me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Can somebody check YouTube, please? So we don't weep at last.
It's working.
Okay, thank you. So basically, variables in JavaScript are containers, and those containers store value, and those values are basically what we've been talking about, are data in JavaScript. So basically information. So sorry. So when you have a variable, it basically means you have a box or a container where you can store value. And the reason why you are doing that is because you want to, at a future time in your program, reference that particular value you stored inside of that variable. Does that make sense?
So
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Sab, just come again.
Okay, I said in JavaScript, in any programming language whatsoever, because whatever you are learning now actually applies to every programming language, just that there might be a lot of modifications and so on, but the ideology and sometimes even the concepts are the exact same. So variables basically are containers for value or data in JavaScript. So we are talking about JavaScript, so that's what I'm saying, in JavaScript. So the reason why you have variables and these containers is so that you can store value in them, and at a future time in your program, reference the value you stored in the variable. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So you can store different data types. You can store different data types inside of your variable in JavaScript. You can store a string in a variable, because remember I said they are just containers, just more like this container that I'm drinking this this I don't know what to call it, juice inside. I can put, tomorrow morning I can decide to put water, and deceive everybody in my neighborhood that I'm drinking juice. Meanwhile, it is water that is inside. But the point is, whether water or poison or Dettol or juice, the container is just like a place where you can store these different types of content. You get the point? So just think about value in JavaScript as the content of this bottle, and you can actually store different kinds of content inside of a container, and that's why it's a container, by the way. So there are different data types in JavaScript. Like we've looked at 4 so far, or 5 basically. We've looked at strings, numbers, booleans, undefined, and null. We've looked at all of these. Then we also looked at in terms of numbers, we looked at infinite numbers, and then negative infinity, positive infinity. And then we looked at null, not a number, which is more like a rubbish kind of expression that doesn't produce anything. And it's at that point your calculator will write shape, or is it, what's that thing that the calculator writes when you punch in a lot of rubbish? And then if you're in an exam situation and you actually think you are right on point, and by the time you punch all of your the last slide of your whether your equation, and then you just realize that your calculator tells you and then they say 5 minutes more, then at that point you just start praying. Okay, so basically variables are basically those kind of boxes that you can store different kind of things in JavaScript, and I keep emphasizing on this because everything you do in JavaScript will basically be about, storing variables and referencing variables and using variables. It's basically you actually playing around data. And the reason why, variables are so important. Remember when I talked about the fact that, when you write your normal code in these high level programming languages or even the low level programming languages, that your computer doesn't read English, it reads what? Binary numbers, right? It reads either 0 or 1. So if you write 13, your 13 has a binary representation in the computer. So your computer understands your 13 as a binary number. So, and I said the modern computer, has about 30 billion bits inside of its working memory. So imagine when you have, that kind of length of bits. How does the computer actually keep track of each part of this, of this chain of bits without wonderful things like variables? So it is with variables you can actually tell the computer, okay, from this portion of this, this bit to this portion, or is going to be this particular value. This is the name I gave to the value, and this is what I'll be calling the value. And whenever I call that value again, I want you to give me that particular portion of this, long sequence of binary numbers. Does that make sense? So, and I'll give you a real life example. So basically, my name is Ololade, and then I am not the only Ololade that exists. But basically, the moment I tell you my name, I can basically, say a lot of other things about me without having to, mention my name to you anymore. Do you get the point? Because somehow, because I already told you my name, you can easily reference who I am in your memory because you know my name, and begin to connect the dots for maybe if I tell you that I have a car, it is in your mind, you'll be able to say Ololade has a car. Or if I tell you that I'm going to relocate to the United Kingdom, I'm going to relocate to Ghana, it is in your mind, you connect the dots. Does that make sense? That it is me you are thinking about. It is because there's a reference in your memory about me. Does that make sense? So when you name variables, you actually create a reference in the computer's memory about a particular value that you have created. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Does it make sense? Like, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, sir, I want to ask.
Yeah, ask.
Okay,
And
so
giving.
variables, if I understand what you've explained, variables are like the characteristics that differentiates the data types.
Basically, not you won't say characteristics. You would just say when you have a data type and you want your computer to be able to reference it later for you, you put it in a variable. The variable is not concerned about, basically in JavaScript, is not concerned about the kind of data you are storing in it. It is just like a container. Does that make sense? So what you store in it is left to you. So the variable itself, that is that container, has no idea what is in it. So it just knows that whenever the computer calls for it, it pours out the value that you've had stored inside of it. Does that make sense? So it's not really characteristics per se, because you can give
Okay.
you understand what I'm talking about. So it's just like,
Okay, so if I want to use that example you gave about the bottle carrying juice, so the bottle does not know the content of what is inside.
yeah,
But I know the content of what I put in the bottle.
yeah,
So I can have different variables that contain similar content.
yes,
Is that what you're saying?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Is there any other question from any other person? Hello?
No, sir.
Are you sure? If I
So, sir, if I get it correctly, variables are just like a memory box that the computer saves. So whenever I need it, I call on it and it gives me the content.
yeah. Yeah, can you repeat what you said again?
I said, so is it safe to say that variables are like a memory box
Yeah.
that's on the system? So whenever I call on it, it gives me the content inside. irrespective of whatever content it is I put inside.
Yes, you can even decide to store undefined in it, and it's still fine. You know, whatever it is,
Okay.
whatever data type that we've discussed so far and the ones we'll be discussing in the future can be stored in a variable. Does that make sense? So now the
Yes, sir.
question is, now we know how wonderful variables are and you know what we can do with them. So how do you actually initialize a variable? Because that's what you call it basically. How do you create a variable and begin to store value in it in JavaScript? So the first thing you have to understand is there's an old keyword, you know, as old as JavaScript itself for, you know, creating variables, and it is the word var. So whenever you use the word var, you know, you kind of just tell the computer, okay, what is to come in the next few characters that is to come before the assignment operator is going to be my variable name. And then talking about, you know, this keyword is just like, you know, how you tell, like I said, the your computer or your, you know, in your text editor, how you actually initialize and say, okay, what is to come is a variable name. So talking about variable name, we have conventions for naming variables in JavaScript, and that means, you know, you can't just go on to, you know, say, okay, you want to name your variable delete. Sorry about that, delete won't work because they are, first of all, reserved words in JavaScript, and you can't use any of those reserved words as a variable name. So I'm going to, you know, I wanted to give you, but I want you to go and do the assignment by yourself. So find a list of all the reserved words in JavaScript before the next class. So that's one of the assignments you have. Hello.
So, yes.
A list of all the variable names of all the reserved words in JavaScript. Are you guys done with that? I'll be taking it down. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Everybody.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, sir, please can you come again? My network was breaking, so I stopped at var. When you were telling us how to use var to use var is what we used to call variables.
You said what?
I said my network was breaking. The last thing I had was you were when you said var is what we use to represent variables. So I didn't get the other messages.
I said what?
I
What?
said I didn't get the last message you sent that when my network was breaking. So the
Okay.
last thing I could pick was where you wrote var. That's what we used to symbolize variable. And that was
Yeah,
the last thing
that
I
what is,
picked.
yeah, that what, like the next set of characters before the assignment operator is a variable. So this is the variable name. The assignment operator is now going to be assigning what you put in front of it as the value of the variable. Does that make sense? So if I press 4, that means 3, sorry, 3 rather, it is the 3 is the value stored in the delete box. Does that make sense? So
Yes, sir.
delete. So whenever I need to, you know, reference this variable, and can you see that we have a red line underneath here? And that's because this is a reserved word in JavaScript. So I told you to find a list of all the reserved words in JavaScript. So delete is one of them. There are many others. So you can't use them as variable names. So there are a couple of, you know, naming conventions in JavaScript, and I'm just going to talk about that before we create our very first JavaScript variable. So yeah, let me just kind of. So the number one, naming conventions. Is that how they spell conventions today in Java? Sorry, in JavaScript. So the first one is that, you know, spaces are not allowed in variable names. So you cannot say your variable name is yet he quotes, no way. It doesn't work. You know, you can't do that. Okay, so that means it is not allowed. Neither can you say your variable name is going to be big T. Is it big T? Big T. Doesn't work. Does that make sense? So spaces are not allowed. And you can already see that you have a red line, just indicating that what you are doing is an abomination in JavaScript and should be taken to the evil forest of JavaScript. Except the king says otherwise. So only letters are allowed, digits, underscores, and dollar signs. So you have A to Z, and then A to Z, and I don't think that makes sense. You hardly see places where people actually use capital letters as well. Then you can use 0 to 9, in your variable names. Then you can also use, the dollar sign, and then you can use the underscore. Does that make sense? So these are the the rules, and then the other one is that you can also JavaScript names, variable names are case sensitive. So that means name is not equal to name. Does that make sense? So if you have one variable that the name of the variable is, let's say, posts, that won't be equal to posts, right? So it is case sensitive. So if you use capital letter somewhere, you're using small letter, trying to reference the same thing, it won't work. So a letter, an underscore, or dollar sign must be the first character must be the first character in a variable name. Any other special character must not be taken. So if you are going to be starting with a JavaScript variable name, is either you start with what? A dollar sign, you start with an underscore, or you start with a letter. Then you can so that's it basically. So you shouldn't do anything abominable. So with a letter, underscore, or dollar sign. So that means, let's just try that. So I can say my variable name is posts, and it will be okay. Or maybe my variable name is magic. Okay, but can you inspire me? Okay, my variable name is what is that? Okay, date. Let me just say date, since nobody's inspiring. So let's say this is my variable name. So I can start a variable, name a variable like this. I can name a variable like this, and this will actually start making you look like a top-notch, like a very, very top-notch developer straight away. By the time you start using dollar sign, and you understand what I'm talking about. So you might want to try that. Does it make sense? So you just use dollar sign to name your variable. Start your naming your variable, and you call all your friends and say, come and see, and they come and see. I know most of you have passed that stage though, so that's just a joke, by the way. So you can start a variable using any of these. Then the other rule, I think, and the other rule is avoid reserved words in JavaScript. So let me just put some examples, e.g. delete, name, and then catch. You can't use any of those inside JavaScript. So you can see we can do, this can be our variable name, and I can come here and say console.log date, and already JavaScript knows what I'm talking about. So it gives me 3, right? So it knows that 3 was stored in this variable. So let's just go on and create some additional kinds of variables, like let's say, and we use most of the accepted conventions. So we also have a couple of naming conventions other than this, forbidden, like the core rules in naming in JavaScript. So there are different types of naming conventions. So we have, okay, let me not go into that here. So we have this where you have, I created a variable using this, one of these rules, that is I can use any of these characters, and I can start with any of these characters. And then you don't want to do this, you can't actually start with a number. As you can see that JavaScript already complains. You can't use a number to start a JavaScript, but you can append a number in the end of, at the end of your JavaScript name. So you can have dates 1 equals 3. I'm sorry, 1, and date 2 equals, so you can name like this, but you can't start with the number. You have to end it. You can end it with the number, but you can't start with the number. So let's create some variables. So let's just kind of write a composition about ourselves. So I'll say my name, and there's one very popular name used in JavaScript, and that's the name John Doe. So I can actually create a variable for my name, and I can use this first convention and say my name, and that's going to make sense. And I say my name is John Doe, yeah. So that works. And I can say and I can say child name, and I can say Junior Doe, and I can say father's name. So this time around, let me just say father name, and I can say Daddy Joe.
Big Joe.
Big Joe, yeah, that's so Big Joe. So I can say mother's name, and you can see I'm actually using different naming conventions, and they are all accurate. I can say mother name, and I can say Mommy Joe. So you can see these are all variables. So I can just come here and then use my console to output something regarding this family, this Joe family. So let's use backticks so that we can use string interpolation. So we can say my name is, what's that? My name, right? And I have a son whose name is that the whose I need? Child's name. And he often visits my father, who goes by the name, what do we need here? Father name. But my mother also, popularly as modern name, popularly known as modern name, wants him to stay with them. So when I say this, see what is happening. My name is John Doe, and I have a son whose name is Junior Doe, and he often visits my father, who goes by the name Big Joe. But my mother, popularly known as Mommy Joe, wants him to stay with them. Does that make sense? So you can see how we are actually consuming variables. So other than this place, I can actually go anywhere else and also reference any of those variables already stored. So man, I love my mother name. So I love my Mommy Joe. Does that make sense? So you can see before we were confined to the fact that we just have to enter our values here, and whenever we enter a value here, we are confined, limited to only using that value here. But now, because we have variables and we've stored references to these values in the computer using these variable names, we can always reference them anywhere in our program. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
It makes sense. But if we're still going to give them a variable name, why not just?
Why did you say?
Why is it not just use the?
Huh?
No, like I was just thinking on my own. That if we're going to give them variable names on a normal day, then what is now even the point of assigning if you will still be calling? Then why not just call the initial names? Like maybe just call the John Doe. But I've got to understand that even when you're giving the naming conventions, like my name, there's no space included. So this sort of gives you the ability to add space and other characters that are sort of restricted in the naming conventions.
Yeah. When you use things like this, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So this casing. I think this is called camel
But
casing.
but sir, anything can be stored, like anything can be saved as the variable, right?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have something's name. It can be anything.
Yeah, definitely. So let's say family size, and I always prefer using this kind of convention. I prefer this. So let's say family size is 58. Okay, no, 58 is outrageous. Family size, and I say states, sorry, var states population. No. So for the most part of this course, maybe we just stick to this convention. State population, let's say 1000, right? And you end every line in JavaScript. I forgot to mention that using a semicolon. I don't know if I mentioned that before. So I can say
Yes, I,
okay, and I can say I can even say state of. So because I can't use space, I just have to look for a different way to actually join my different multiple words together. You get. So I can say state of origin. I can say Ogun State. Then I can say country of birth using camel casing, and I can say Nigeria. Does that make sense? So we can begin to use all of these variables inside of our program. But the thing is that whenever you're working or as a program developer, all through your career, you want to stick to one naming convention, except if you start working for a company and they start using a different naming convention. That is the only time you need to switch. You see, because most times you want to be able to, and there are a couple of rules regarding how you want to name your variables. You don't want to call your variables very funny names that you can't always intuitively remember. Does that make sense? So here I know that this is my name, so anywhere in the program I don't even have to come and check what I called my variable. I can always, based on my own naming convention, I know that I call this my name, and I know that I'm calling my name child name, father name. And this will be a problem when my program becomes very large and I have, like, let's say hundreds of variable or even thousands sometimes, and I have to reference every variable, and for every variable I want to reference I have to go and start reminding myself what the name was by going back to where I declared it. Does that make sense? So naming conventions kind of just helps you remember, okay, this is what I did. Every single word, the first word starts with a small letter, and every single word after that starts with a capital letter. Does that make sense? So by that I don't have to always go back to my variables, to where I declared my variables. I can always just think about the name I call them and write it out without having to revisit them. Does that make sense? So that's why conventions are actually a thing. You have to stick to them if you don't want to, except you'll be having a lot of problems to deal with, and issues to solve that shouldn't even exist in the first place. Does that make sense? Hello. Hello.
yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so that's pretty much it. So I think we've exhausted most of the thing I decided we are going to do in the first week. So I think at this point I just allow you guys, go and rest. Tomorrow is Saturday, and I know some of you might be leaving very early to wherever you have to go. I know some of you are ministers of the gospel and you have to go for, to go and do morning cry tomorrow morning. So I don't hinder the work of God. So I think we should call it, an evening here. And then if you have a question, I think this is the best time for you to, ask. Or you want me to fire down? I hardly get tired though. But I won't continue actually. Don't be afraid. I know those questions. Your answer used to be, your answer will be, don't continue, but you don't know how to say it. The person that says it first will look like the bad student. So everybody keeps quiet. Okay, so that's fine. So is there any question at this point? If there are no questions, I think we've had a great time together, and then I'll just end the stream right now on YouTube. Hold on. Okay, the stream for today is it's about 1 hour actually.